So, Frank Du Bois, you were a lizard in the swamp called DC for some time.
Well, lizard or maybe an alligator.
So you served under.
Well, like I say, I was a legislative assistant to Senator Domenici, and then my second tour of duty under President Reagan, I worked in the Department of Interior.
So in the 70s, we saw something change. What was that in terms of the environmental?
Well, the impact they've had is, if you consider that the ag community controls about 80% of the water and operates over close to 90% of the land, then what the environmentalists have done is discriminated against the ag producers more than any other group. The cost of doing business and the cost of complying with all these environmental regulations can't be met by a mom and pop operation or a family farm. And as a result, these large farms have come in and the corporate farms have come in. So they've even changed the face of agriculture in New Mexico. And if you look carefully at this, you'll see that the largest impact they've had has been in those counties where there's a large federal landmass. And a good example of that would be in northern New Mexico and the impact environmental policies have had up there. What the power brokers and the feds didn't take away from the Hispanic farmers and ranchers in northern New Mexico early on, the environmentalists have been taking away from them since the 1970s. And they've used the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the pesticide laws, and federal grazing and grazing management type laws. They've used those to remove these ranchers. And then this has an impact on the local community. For instance, if a rancher has to move away because of environmental policies, then he no longer lives in that community. His children are no longer in the school district. And so the impacts keep reverberating and doing damage to that local community.
But I thought environmentalists, they tell us that they're for clean air, clean water. They want to take the land and make it the way it used to be, the way it's supposed to be.
Well, I think if you look back at some of the founders of the environmental movement and some of the people who were involved early, some of them thought they were doing well by promoting these environmental policies. But if you look at the more recent history, they come right out and say that they're against livestock grazing and against agriculture. There was no more moo by 92, cattle free by 93. There are environmental organizations that exist solely to rid the West of grazing on public land, such as the Western Watersheds Project. So they're more upfront about it now than they were originally, and they're having a huge negative impact on farmers and ranchers in the state of New Mexico.
What about the Wildlands Project or the Sky Islands, some of those other people?
Well, that's what I mean by that. They're more upfront about it. There used to be what people thought were secret agendas and plans and everything. They're no longer secret. They have websites. They publish articles. They put out information. They're very straightforward in the fact that they want no livestock grazing and in some instances no humans at all in these habitats. That is their goal. And if they can use the Endangered Species Act to accomplish that goal, they will. If by declaring these areas wilderness, it accomplishes that goal, that's what they go after. The Center for Biological Diversity, which has become famous for their ability to file suit under the Endangered Species Act and to either limit or prevent certain projects on federal lands. And they're very good at what they do. they've been successful. And under the federal laws, they did this most famously under Clinton. They're starting to do it now again under Obama. They file suit. The federal agency then settles. And when the federal agency settles with them, that means they get their attorney's fees. So they get this check from the federal government, and then they take that money and they go file suit someplace else. It's a never-ending process. I'm sure there were instances where the federal agency hadn't followed the proper procedure, and they were right to settle the lawsuit. But there were many other instances where they could have done a much better job of defending the federal agency and gone to court and won. And instead of doing that, they settled. And see, when they settle, that does two things. That means the environmentalist group that files suit gets what they want on the federal land. In other words, the agency's going to change what they're doing.
They win the issue.
Yes, they win the issue. And then in addition, they get their attorney's fees back so they can then go file suit someplace else.
It's a hell of a cottage industry.
Exactly. If you look at utilities, have to have corridors and they have to have right-of-ways that have to be issued by the federal government. If you want to do any work with the leasable minerals, such as oil and gas, and it involves federal land, either surface or subsurface, you have to go through the federal government to get a permit and to be able to lease that. So there are many areas and ways, state highways would be another one, where this is impacting many people beyond the ag community. My point was, since the ag community has control over so much of the surface and owns so much of the water, they're the target that the environmentalists have been going after because of the amount of control that the ag community has over these resources. So they need to wrest that control away from the ag community and put it into the hands of the federal government or state government for them to initiate and get the policies they want. What's happened on many of these laws is the original intent of Congress in passing these laws has been distorted by lawsuits and by the federal judiciary to create an entity that Congress did not intend when they first passed these laws. And if you look at what's happening right now, those environmental laws are being used as a tool to either limit or get rid of farmers and ranchers. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And they're really being used as a land use mechanism rather than as an environmental mechanism. In other words, their real concern may not be clean air. It's probably not clean water. But they're using the enforcement provisions of those laws and the federal agency's management to try to comply with those laws. They're using the court system to go in and utilize those environmental laws to remove or limit the amount of production that goes on. And they're being very successful at it.
Tell me about Otero Mesa.
Otero Mesa is a frontier oil and gas production area in southern New Mexico, southern Otero County. It's located about directly south of Alamogordo, right along the Texas-New Mexico line. And what we have there is, we believe, a tremendous amount of gas reserves down there, a new frontier production of gas reserves, and a little bit of oil there. We feel like to keep the economy going well in New Mexico, keep funding education good, that we need to get into Otero Mesa and be able to produce mostly that gas reserves down there.
Well, it's my understanding, Pat, that the Otero Mesa it's been quoted from the environmentalists as being the Serengeti of the Southwest, a place of amazing diversity. It is some of the largest grasslands, unperturbed grasslands in the country, which need to be preserved. Is that not true?
Well, Otero Mesa is really kind of a desert type lands in southern New Mexico. They're not really the great grasslands. The carrying capacity, the land office, we go by carrying capacity by number of cows per section. Some of our better lands, good grasslands, will carry 15 to 20 animal units per section. Otero Mesa is rated about 5, 6, or 7. So it's not really the great grasslands everybody claims they are. But it's good. It's good ranching country. I know several ranchers down there that run cattle down there. But it's also a place where oil and gas production is happening in the state of Texas, right below the line. And those grasslands, we're on the farthest extremes of supposedly the Otero Mesa grasslands. It runs through Texas, runs through Old Mexico. So it's really not the great grasslands that everybody speaks of. Anybody been down there and looked at it? Everybody you talk to, you ask them to raise their hand if they've been to Otero Mesa, and they say no, they haven't been. So really, if we want to keep our economy going like we're doing, the standard of living we want to do, we need to be producing gas in Otero Mesa, because Otero Mesa is not that pristine area that you say it is. There's really no trees out there. There's no ponderosa pines. There's no elk. There's a bombing range entirely down one side of it. There's radio antennas out there, miles and miles of pipelines. There's miles and miles of transmission lines, and there's over 100 wells have been dug in the 50s and 60s, mainly looking for oil. And I think all they found was natural gas. That's why I want to go back in there and try to get that natural gas. So it's what's at stake here really is we're talking about like 500 jobs, 400 jobs in the initial drilling phase, and in the permanent production phase, probably another 100 jobs. And annual income to the state land office be anywhere from $3 to $5 million per year. And we feel like the annual income to New Mexico, throughout New Mexico, around 30 to 40 million a year. So what we really need here is we need to go get those reserves. Our revenues are decreasing in New Mexico. Legislature's raising taxes. They're taking adding more taxes to us. So we really need to produce this oil and gas down there to help New Mexico and help education. Well, let's address the environmental concerns, because I met with the BLM when we first started doing leases down there, and we got some leases being expired now. They put some really restrictive covenants on oil and gas production in Otero Mesa. One, you can't have there's no pit, period. You can't put a pit down there, so you're not going to damage the water supply down there. Another thing is they've withdrawn a couple 100,000 acres in different areas. BLM has, state land office withdrawn about 5,000 acres, so we're not drilling in the lower lands where the better grasslands at. We're drilling up there where the creosote mesquites are at that don't have very good grass production. We're going to reseed the black grama grass. We're only using 1/10 of 1%, 1,600 acres for drilling down there. The roads are in there, so out of 2 million acres, we're going to use 1,600, less than 1%, 1/10 of 1%. So you can see the restrictions are on there. We're going to protect the environment. We can do both here. We can produce oil and gas, at the same time protect our environment.
You tell me, the environmentalists being against oil and gas?
Well, they're against doing any kind of frontier production anywhere is what it amounts to. That's probably one of the most disappointing things in the land office since we got in there in 2003 is we haven't seen frontier production anywhere. Where we tried it in Galisteo Basin in Santa Fe, which would have a couple old producing wells. The county shut that down. We've tried it in Otero Mesa, shut it down. Mora County is doing the same thing. Rio Arriba County has. So they're not really concerned about the environment. They're concerned about stopping everything. The true environmentalists, I think, are the ranchers, the producers that know what to do out there, know what the land's like, know how to take care of it. That's who the true environmentalists are, and they really know how to produce income, graze cattle, produce oil and gas. At the same time, you're making money, you're taking care of the environment. But I want to touch on one other subject. The environmentalists say they don't want to do anything out there. They want to save the water. Well, us at the land office said, okay, you want to save the water? Well, let's sell the water. So we wanted to do a water development out there. Mm-hmm. And a water development takes the same thing as a natural gas development. You have to bring in drilling rigs. You drill down through there to your water. You put in pipelines. You put in pumping stations. And we wanted to take that water, pump it over to the Rio Grande River at the delivery point going into Texas, deliver some of that water to Texas and keep more of our other water up in the Albuquerque, Santa Fe area out of the Rio Grande. Of course, that was opposed because it takes exactly the same thing to do a water play, drilling for water, as it does for drilling for natural gas. You still have to put in the pipelines and drill the wells and put in pumping stations.
If your water pipeline breaks, I really don't think it's going to hurt the environment. So, I have my theories on who these people are and what they're trying to do.
Steve, it's hard to tell. I don't really understand how their thinking is. It just seems like they just want to take a piece of land, set it out there, not to be able to do anything with it, any kind of production. And the next step will be is you can't go in there. You can only stand back miles and look at it. You won't even be able to get in there. So what we're doing, the environmental movement, is we're destroying jobs in America. We're destroying the quality of life. We're taking the hope away from our kids that they're going to go to school for 4, 5, 6 years and come out and have a good job. 52% of graduates from down here last May didn't have a job from New Mexico State University. That's what needs to be addressed. I think the job creation should be top and foremost in America. And once we do that, if companies are employing people, not just the government, 16,000 new IRS agents, whatever they want to do there, the private sector is the basis of all taxation. If the private sector is employing people, that means we're out there using our natural resources, going after oil and gas, you doing our mining. Things will just fall into place.
Your name is Gene Wood,
Yes,
and you were a border patrolman for how long?
30 years.
30 years.
Yes, sir.
As boots on the ground as well as a supervisor?
I started my career as a Border Patrol trainee, of course, went through the Border Patrol Academy successfully, became a deputy chief in Tucson, and later my first chief position was in McAllen, Texas.
You were a sector chief.
Yes, both in McAllen and later in San Diego, where I retired.
Now, San Diego is the busiest sector
At
of
that
the whole
time-
southern border?
At that time, it was the busiest sector in the border.
Wow.
Tucson has that dubious honor now.
How does environmentalism possibly affect anything having to do with our border security? Wilderness areas, national monuments, wildlife refuges. How does that connect?
Well, wilderness and enforcement are not compatible.
Why is that? I don't understand.
Well, the definition of wilderness basically, in fairly basic language, means that those people charged with enforcing immigration laws on the border are not permitted on those lands. And no one else is either except the administrators of those lands. So often when an area is designated as wilderness, that same legislation that permits that designation revokes the authority of Homeland Security officers to do their job.
Just by means of the fact they can't go there anymore. But I thought they're welcome to be in there, but they have to be on special. They can't use machinery. Is that
No, they
how
can't.
can they enforce the law?
Some areas you can enter on foot or on horseback. But remember, electronic sensors or other devices, radio towers, communications equipment, drag roads, which are commonly used in the border, are not permitted.
So you have no access or limited access, and then you have no infrastructure.
That's correct.
Wow. So we're taking this out of the domain of the Border Patrol. Is that accurate? Or?
You're taking it out of the domain of any enforcement. Sheriff's Department are not allowed there either.
Don't the Mexican citizens not, the drug runners and the illegals, not run their, don't they respect the wilderness?
A good example of that is to the west of us in Arizona. Oregon Pipe is an example that's been so decimated by illegal alien activity that the managers of that area won't even allow visitors in there. The signs are up over there saying, this is a dangerous area because of illegal activity.
If I really care about an area and I want to keep it pristine and beautiful, if I take it and create a wilderness area there, a zone where people, the illegal aliens and the drug runners, the smugglers run through there, what does that in fact do for my beloved ecosystem that I'm trying to preserve?
Well, the exact opposite of what you may hope to do, this idea of protection, the exact opposite happens because experience has shown, and there's a lot of evidence that that land has been totally decimated. It'll be years, even if that illegal alien traffic was stopped today, it'll be years in the future before that land ever recovers.
People use the term invasion to describe what's happening on the southern border. People use the term porous. Are those pejorative terms? Are those, in fact, is that a wrong description of what's going on down there?
It may be a little bit too modest a term in my view. Estimates vary, 14 to 16 million illegal aliens in the United States now. They didn't get here because the border was secure by any means. So, the description that you want to use probably doesn't make that much difference. The bottom line is they're here and they're still coming.
What would you tell our congressional delegation? We're talking about Mr. Udall, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Teague, Mr. Ben-Ray Lujan, and Mr. Heinrich. What would you tell them? What would you say to them about the situation on our southern border?
Well, it's futile, of course, but they know probably as well as anybody, maybe better than most, what that situation is already. They are not misinformed about they know what's there, and I believe they've made choices. As an example of this latest effort to put wilderness designation on a large part of our New Mexico border, they know, the sponsors of this, they have to understand that there is a great danger in doing this. So I think it's a choice. We, the congressional delegation, have chosen to proceed with this, knowing full well of the possible consequences, unintended or not.